Hey, this is Andy here with Libertarian Revolution, and I'm coming to you today from the Libertarian Party National Convention for 2018 in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'm here with Arvin Vohra, who is the current vice chairman of the Libertarian National Party, and he's also running for United States Senate in Maryland as a Libertarian Party candidate. Now, how many terms have you been on the LNC?
This is my third term on the LNC. My first term was as an at-large representative, and I've served 2 terms as vice chair.
Okay. And how many times have you run for office in Maryland?
It's quite a 3, 4, 5 times. It's a few times.
What did you run for?
I've run for House of Delegates. I've run for Congress. I'm running for Senate right now.
Do you know what % of the vote you got in each of those races?
Some very small amount.
Okay. Now, let's see. Moving onward, you're running for re-election now. I don't know if you're going to get it or not, but if you don't get it, would you run for another an at-large seat?
We're going to see about that tomorrow.
Okay, we'll see. Okay, well now you came under.
Say stick around.
Stick
around because tomorrow is going to be exciting.
Oh, before I get into the more controversial stuff, ask you about. Apparently, you have some sort of education business that you're in.
I do.
Could you describe that?
I run my own private education business. We are not involved in the state in any way. I fundamentally believe that an educator's first job is to set a moral standard for his or her students. And so one of the moral standards that I set is we take no money of any kind from the government, no contracts, nothing in any way from the government. I believe in a complete separation of education and state. I believe the government has no place of any kind either paying for, regulating, or influencing education in any way at all.
How did you get into the education business?
I got into education. I've just always been interested in it. And then after college, I started a tutoring service, and it gradually grew and became a little bit of a larger organization.
Now, when you were in college, were you planning to do something other than education?
I actually didn't know what I wanted to do, and this is one of the reasons that I've talked to a lot of people, that college isn't a great option for most people. College is a great option if you really specifically want to get something very specific from a specific college, but if you're trying to find your way, there are many better ways to do that. One of the main things that I support is ending all college subsidies, all federal financial aid, all government guaranteed student loans, because I believe that we need to stop dumping money into that type of a system. The first thing that would do is lower the cost of college tuition to make it affordable, and it would also encourage people to explore other options rather than thinking that college is the only thing you can ever do after high school.
Mm-hmm. And did you start tutoring while you were in college?
I did tutoring in college.
What kind of tutoring did you do?
I worked on math, computers and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right now my business does math and chemistry and reading and pretty much a little bit.
Now, is your business, is it a tutoring business, or is it like a school, or is it more of a tutoring business?
It's not a simple question. I mean, we have to go in a whole video just about that.
Oh, okay.
Long story short, it is individualized education in a group setting. It's super innovative. We use a lot of new ideas that haven't really been seen before in education. And the thing is, that's something that I'm allowed to do because I'm in the free market. That's why I encourage all government school teachers. Look around you. There are parts of the free market where your talents could be used for something better. You could leave government schools and you could join the free market of education. And it's harder, but it's more exciting. You have the freedom to innovate. You're not stuck in a broken system. You are as good as you can be. And it's the best decision I've ever made as an educator.
I've heard that your students are actually outperforming the government school people, that you're actually outperforming them. Is that?
In a sense, that's true, but we're also pulling from a very competitive group. So most of our students who come to us are looking to get into Ivy League colleges. So it's not just like a neutral random sample of students.
Oh, okay.
It's very, very ambitious students. I do believe, though, we give them a pretty strong advantage because of the way that we think about education as an individual process, not as a process of forced institutional collectivization.
Mm-hmm. Now, what would be your message to people who teach in the government schools? I mean, here's my take on it. I don't like the government schools either. I totally agree with you. They should be abolished. Government should have no role at all in education. But there's, being that it does have a role in education, and there's people who want to work in that field, I think some of them are terrible people. I mean, there are government school teachers who are really bad and are messing kids up. But there's also some who are well-meaning people, and maybe even a few of them might actually even be good teachers. So a lot of times people freak out, especially if they work in the public school system, when libertarians say you want to abolish the government schools. schools. So what is your message to people who work in the public school system?
Almost all people in the world are well-meaning. Hitler thought he was well-meaning. Nazis thought they were well-meaning. People who were slave owners thought that they were well-meaning, or they were well-meaning. Being well-meaning is not good enough. The reason that we consider ethics, the reason we consider morality, is because we have to question what it means to do the right thing. If you are accepting, in my opinion, if you are accepting a STEP-funded salary and setting that as a standard for your student, you're not doing the right thing. But here's the thing, none of us is perfect. We all do a mix of good things and a mix of bad things. And if you are currently, say, financially dependent on a government school job, there are things that you can do while you get that independence. One of the biggest things you can do is to post publicly, either using your name or anonymously. And if you want to just tag me or email me, I'll post it for you. I'll just say this is an anonymous message that I got from a government school teacher. Is you can talk about why you as a teacher, as you as a government school teacher, believe that government schools should end. That's an important message that you can give. You know, I'm not saying that we all have to be 100% perfect all the time, but do everything you can. Don't say, well, it's kind of convenient. Say, I'm doing this for now because I need to do something. I need to, put food on my table or something, and then look for alternatives. And then while you're there, do what you can to shut down the worship of that thing. Do whatever you can to say, end government schools.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to start to get into this. You came under fire over the last several months for making some comments that some people would consider to be controversial. Now, I haven't read every comment that you made. Some of them I agreed with. There were a few that I didn't agree with. I guess the first thing started out with comments about the military. And I agree with you in spirit that you're right. People, the military is like a gang of thugs, as are the police, as are all government enforcers. And that they engage, the military engages in immoral acts, unconstitutional acts from a legal standpoint, getting involved in the affairs of other countries without a declaration of war. But on the flip side of that, I don't think everybody who joins the military is necessarily a terrible person. A lot of people have gone through the government school, brainwashing. They came out, they needed a job. I can tell you, my father was in the military. And he joined because he had a college degree, but he got married and had a family, had me, and needed a way to make a living. And most people who join the military join for one of two reasons. They're joining because they need to make a living, or they're looking to get job training or money for college. So, are you familiar, by the way, with a guy named Mark Passio?
I'm not.
Okay, he's a hardcore libertarian anarchist from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I don't believe he's ever been a member of the Libertarian Party. He's one of a non-voting anarchists, and he's got a YouTube channel. I highly recommend looking him up sometime. Mark Passio, spelled P-A-S-S-I-O, and anyway. He gets into a lot of occult stuff but connections with world leaders and things like that. But he talks about the military, and he takes the really hardcore, tough medicine, tough love approach like you did. Like he says, basically, if you're in the military, you're like a dog, like an attack dog for the state, like an obedient, like a pit bull or something. And anyway. What is your thoughts of your coming under fire for those comments? Would you do it over again? And anyway, so what are your thoughts on that?
When people say that I'm doing something immoral because I wanted the money, that is the justification for most crimes. When somebody burglarizes a house, they're presumably doing it because they wanted the money. Wanting money is not sufficient moral justification for an immoral action. The real reason that so many people join the military is because we have allowed social respect of the military to infect our culture. If the military did not have that social respect, very few people would do it. If it had the same level of social respect as other forms of theft, for example, burglary, most people who have been brainwashed into thinking that it's really good and heroic to join the military, they probably wouldn't do burglary because they want to hold themselves to a higher standard. We need to be clear that that is not a high standard. We need to say that joining the military is not righteous, it's not noble, it's not heroic, it's not any of those things. And if we want to really change culture, we have to change how we treat the sacred cows of the state. Military, government school teachers, they right now are the sacred cows of the state. It's what the state hides behind. It is like a propaganda shield. And it is absolutely essential for us to de-inflate that. It is absolutely essential for us to say, it's not a good thing to do, to make this a different culture. Because here's the fact. This culture has produced this government. If we knock down this government, this culture will produce this government immediately again. We have to change the culture, and the icons of a culture are the most important parts of a culture.
Now, here's one problem, and I agree with you in spirit, but here's one problem, and that is that a lot of people, the average person, doesn't see taxation as theft, and they think government is legitimate. And were you at that point at one point in your life? Like before you, I presume that at some point you didn't know what a libertarian was.
Yeah.
I think we all were at one point, or most of us anyway.
I was woken up by somebody who wasn't polite, who wasn't understated. I was woken up by somebody who started by saying taxation that's the starting point. Taxation is theft. And I'm talking about Ayn Rand, who was one of the biggest influences on my early awakenings.
How did you find out, or how did you get into Ayn Rand?
It's just like you hear about books, and I heard a lot of people say that her books were real bad, so I decided I would check them out on my own to verify. And to me, they were inspiring because it was a whole different way of looking at the world. See, cultural change, in my opinion, leads to government change. But cultural change has to come from personal change. I had to personally change the way I looked at things. I had to personally say, yes, there are people who produce things, and there are people who are basically welfare leeches. And I had to analyze it closely and say that if you are getting money that is stolen, that you didn't earn, or you're getting something that was paid for by money that was stolen that you didn't earn, you're engaging in welfare. And government schools are welfare. They're welfare for the middle class, so they're more popular just because the middle class is more numerous than the lower class, but they're still equally wrong. It's still putting you in that wrong camp. My decision to not become a government school teacher, because I've always wanted to be a teacher, my decision to not work inside of government schools was not a simple, easy decision. It happened that way because I'd been exposed to these ideas. And I want to expose young people who are into education to these ideas that says you can and you should take that skill and passion and use it for something morally excellent rather than something morally reprehensible.
Now, a lot of these services, or quote-unquote services in some cases, provided by government, there's a lot of them that there would still be a demand for, even if we were in a libertarian anarcho-capitalist society. I think there would still be a demand for a military. It might not be the military as we know it today, but I think like a security force or something like that, private security or private militias, but they just wouldn't be funded by taxation. Same thing with schools, same thing with paving the roads. Now, I don't think there'd be any demand for tax collectors. There could be bill collectors if the bills were voluntary, but and there may not be a demand for like a drug enforcement agency, but there would still be security guards. So do you think that like some of these people who do join the military or become public school teachers or cops, have you ever tried to let them know that, hey, there could still be a place for you in a libertarian society?
I've shared links to Soldier of Fortune magazine. There is a demand in the world for mercenaries. Now, you might want to check to make sure you agree with what that service is doing, but at least it's paid for by the people who are using it. Unfortunately, actually, many mercenary organizations are currently used by the U.S. government, but at least it's maybe a slight different way of thinking about things. One very important thing is this: if we were paying for our own security, then we would have the option to either pay for something that defends, France and Saudi Arabia and Israel. I probably wouldn't pay for that, but I wouldn't stop anybody else from paying for it, or something that's much cheaper that just covers your own area. And I don't even think that most people would want to pay to protect America. They would probably want to pay to protect their area.
Their city or county or something.
Like where they actually live. Honestly, not to be blunt, but if there was a military attack on California, I'm not sure that would really affect me in Maryland, and unless it eventually got there. And so my goal would be to pay as little as possible for the protection of myself, my family, and my property. I do believe that people say, people always go around saying that selfishness is bad, but here's the thing. Selfishness leads to innovation, it leads to improvement, it leads to lower cost. Selflessness usually leads to problems. Many of the people who join the military are trying to be selfless. Unfortunately, they're doing something immoral. Selflessness is more vulnerable to moral manipulation than selfishness, which almost always just leads to innovation.
Yeah, now I've done a tremendous amount of political outreach, libertarian outreach, and I've talked to all kinds of people, including many government employees. And I'll say, generally speaking, as a group, government employees are generally pretty hostile to libertarians and libertarianism. Some of them, it's just based on like they're afraid libertarians are going to just take their job away, and some of them are just have a philosophical hatred for us. Now, I will say this, that in terms of military people, I've had more success talking to military people than I've had talking to, let's say, cops or government school teachers or like DMV employees or something. So it's, and when Ron Paul was running for president, he actually got more donations from people in the military than any other candidate that was running at that time period. So have you done a lot of outreach, like going out and talking to these people, like military people and stuff like that?
I have.
And what approach have you used? The hardcore approach, or what approach have you used, and what were your results?
Here's what I've noticed, and to be fair, it has been, I haven't really talked to that many military groups in the last few months. But
Okay.
one thing that I did notice is that whenever I was talking to, say, at least 10 people who were in the military, in my opinion, at least 8, maybe it's only 2, were kind of just looking for any excuse to get out. They were looking for the social support to get out. See, I don't want, while I have all the respect in the world for Dr. Paul, I don't want to be like Ron Paul getting donations from the military. I want to get people in the military out of the military. I don't just want their money. I want to help them make a life improvement. I want them to leave the military. That's the most powerful donation I can imagine. There are things to me that are more important than money, and one of those is helping people improve their lives. And real outreach to the military does involve, in my opinion, asking people to leave and successfully helping people leave the military.
A lot of them can't leave right away, though, because, I guess they could, but they could end up in jail.
It's true that if you're actively deployed and if you're on a battlefield, then you have a very complex situation.
Yeah.
But there are many options. For example, you have a general discharge as an option, which is open to many more people than realize it. There's not that much outreach and information about general discharges, but it's something that can definitely happen. Josh Smith, who is one of the candidates for chair, he left the military based using a general discharge. So again, it's not that it's true that there are some people in the military who can't leave right away. There's also a lot of people in the military who can leave right away, who have been disillusioned and are just looking for anyone outside to tell them, no, you're not crazy. The dissatisfaction you have with the military, that's right, that's real. This is part of your journey. Right now, you're in that part of your journey where you're trapped and you're stuck, but you're about to see a whole new light, and you're about to develop an inner moral courage. You're not going to be waiting for somebody else to tell you what to do. You're going to have somebody else saying, listen, I think what you're thinking is right. Why not go through these steps? Why not consider these steps, as opposed to stand here, go here, shoot that guy?
Okay, now on to the next, another point of controversy here, and that was age of consent. Now I'm going to just give you my stance on it.
Okay.
I agree that 18 is an arbitrary age. But on the flip side, I also do not agree with, I think there has to be a line at some point. At some point, where do you cross the line between a voluntary act between consenting adults or individuals who are capable of making the decision and somebody, like a child molester? And I think there's really not a good answer to this. If we lived in a libertarian anarchist society, one option could be, it could be decided at a community level. There could be, covenant, private covenant communities, and to say, if you want to live in this community, you sign a contract saying that I will not have sex with anyone under a certain age. It could be 18, could be 16, could be whatever, 19, 17, whatever. Another option is to just judge it on a case-by-case basis and let the courts adjudicate it. So, but I do think that there's a line at some point, and I'll say, like, if I was a father and I had a child, a son or a daughter, and somebody molested them, an older person preyed upon them, I would be pretty damn angry, and I may want to go commit acts of violence against that person. I'm not opposed to the concept of, and I guess I would be opposed to it somewhat from a practical standpoint in the society we're in, but not a philosophical standpoint. I'm talking about vigilante justice.
Okay.
And if we had a system of fully informed juries, like jury nullification, I think that a lot of jurors, if some guy said, hey man, this guy molested my kid, I'm going to go beat this guy up, or I'm going to go kill this guy, I think under a fully informed jury system, a lot of jurors would acquit that person. Anyway, what is your take? Because you made some comments on that some people provoke some outrage among some people. So what's your...
It's an incendiary issue, and honestly, it's not to me one of my most important issues. It is not a large numerical amount of money. The military welfare complex, that's $1 trillion a year. The educational welfare complex, that's another $500 or $600 billion a year. Those are big ticket items. Medicare, Medicaid are huge, and those are things that are really high on my list. Age of consent, honestly, it's not very high on my list. But during the controversy, I actually learned a lot about different approaches that people have used historically. In the Roman Empire, families would just decide when somebody was ready. It was usually when somebody had gone through puberty, and if the family felt that this person was like too immature or whatever, your parents would basically say when you were ready. And of course, these are more like extended families that there was a lot more guidance going on. That's one system that I thought was very interesting. Another system that I thought was very interesting was the German system, where the age of consent is not so fixed, but if the younger person feels that he or she has been taken advantage of, then they are allowed to take that person to court. So in other words, it's not considered a crime against the state, it's considered a crime against a person. So it's handled much more like a lawsuit, like a tort law, although there can be, from my understanding, criminal penalties for that. There are a lot of different things. What we have right now in America, though, is broken. You have situations that to me are frankly ridiculous. I remember being interviewed on this topic by somebody who was very angry at my position. So I just asked it. Actually, I didn't ask. The other co-host asked him about his first time. And he said, well, yeah, I was 15, she was 19. And I said, well, you understand that by the current laws, she would be, in that state, she would be considered a sexual predator, she would go to jail, she would be in a sex offender registry for life. Do you think that's fair? And he had to kind of admit that, no, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I learned about Murray Rothbard's position, which is actually, I think, a very interesting one, where he said that if you are able to homestead yourself, as in at any age, if you're able to basically provide yourself, you have your own housing, then because you've taken adult responsibilities, you should have adult rights, which includes the right to have sex with whoever you want, assuming that they're.
Now that leads to an interesting question. The allegations coming out of Hollywood with some actors, particularly some who were child actors, like Corey Feldman and the late Corey Haim, and there are other child actors that say that they were preyed upon. They had enough money to support themselves. They were making lots of money as child actors. So, I mean, what's your take on that?
It's a very interesting question. The question is, if they were manipulated, I do believe force is wrong, and I do believe fraud is wrong. That's why I've said many times what military recruiters do is morally wrong. Because even though they're not forcing anybody, they are committing fraud. And fraud to me is just as bad as force. And if there's manipulation going on, it's something I find morally reprehensible. I do not support it. I do not approve of it. I do not believe it should be part of our society in any way whatsoever. But you also have situations where, I remember being, a teenager, and there are many people who are, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, for the sake of this argument, I'm going to say that they're men or boys, however you want to look at them, who feel that they are ready to have sex. And sometimes they're wrong. But they are, in my opinion, able to make that type of decision. I don't think that because a person is below a certain age, they're automatically not ready, or above a certain age, I don't think they're automatically ready. I do believe that this is a family issue first. Let me put it this way. If there was no state, I would not create a state to enforce age of consent laws. I don't think most libertarians would either. To me, this is something that's best handled by families.
What do you think about the idea, if we had a stateless society, of, let's say, you want to live in this private covenant community, you sign a contract, because this is a big issue for a lot of people that have kids. What do you think of people signing a contract saying, if I want to live in this private city, private community, I will agree to not have sex with people under the age of 18 or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've talked about a lot, which is that I do believe in small competing governments. And I have no problem with a small private government, much like a country club that might say, if you want to be come to this country club, you have to wear a jacket. That's not saying that everyone in the world has to wear a jacket. Just if you want to come onto our property, then you need to wear a jacket. Similarly, if somebody buys a bunch of land, there's tons of land for sale in the United States and another country, and says that if you want to be part of this community, one of our rules that you have to sign off on is our age of consent is 35. I'm totally fine with that. That's a difference between, that's saying that these are the rules that you have to come to enter, as opposed to saying, these are the rules that we are enforcing on others. It's kind of like with the military. Do I think defense of America is okay? Absolutely. I don't think the military is always bad. I think the military enabling this foreign policy right now is bad. Enforcing American values on other countries is wrong. But defending America, I think, is great. I just don't think that's what the military is doing in any conceivable way.
Now, did you say something to the effect of that parents should be able to pimp out their children?
I don't think I ever said anything like that.
Okay, I'd heard something about that. Because that's not something I would agree with. But anyway, moving onward to the next topic in the chain of controversy. You had said something about shooting school board members. Now, wait, well, before we go on, I would say I've made radical statements myself. And in fact, I've said, and some people gave me heat for making some radical statements. Like I said, I think that there's moral justification for violently overthrowing the government. Now, I don't know that that's the smartest strategy to pursue. Like, we'd probably get crushed right now. But I think there's moral justification if a bunch of Americans or people in other countries got really mad and went and overthrew their government, like a right to revolution. So I agree with that. But I don't think I would target school board members. Like, they'd be very low on they'd be so low on the list that I don't think they'd really be worth going after with shooting school board members. Now, and I agree with you. There are problems with government schools. I don't necessarily think every school board member is a terrible person, but there probably are some terrible people on school boards. But like, if you said shooting congressmen, I might agree with that more than I would agree with shooting school board members. So what is your take on that? I mean, why did you say that?
That was a poorly timed and an ineffectively delivered attempt at a joke. I basically immediately apologized and immediately retracted it publicly. There's a difference. The things I say about the military, I do believe to be largely true. I do believe we need to stop military worship. I do believe we need to stop military actions, and I do believe we need to encourage young men and women to not enlist. I think it's incumbent on adults to say, listen, that is the wrong thing to do. Here are some other things you can do. The school board thing, it's not my actual position. It was a stupid joke that I said out of context, that I was trying to be funny, it just wasn't funny. I apologized for it, I retracted it immediately. It is not a position that I have. I don't support violence of any kind.
Now, do you support violence in self-defense?
My basic doctrine of violence comes from my training in martial arts, which is I believe in the doctrine of minimum force to get the other person to stop. So, for example, if someone's trying to come at me and is trying to hit me and they're drunk, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to immobilize them. Even though it might be morally justifiable for me to try to break their nose or something, I'm going to try to avoid that as much as I can. And the same thing with self-defense. I do believe in the doctrine of minimum force. Now, sometimes you're right. Sometimes the minimum force to get someone to stop attacking you is lethal force. And that's like a tragedy to me. I don't think that killing anybody is ever good. But I do, so there are theoretical situations, but I do believe the vast majority of situations in which people say that lethal force is justified, by my standards, is actually not justified because there is a lower level of force that would get that person to stop. I've often pushed to insist that police officers keep primarily with them non-lethal weapons. I'm telling you, getting hit by a beanbag is enough to knock most people down. You don't need to go around killing adults or potentially killing kids that you've misconstrued the situation with. Non-lethal force should always be used. No force is even better. It's one of the reasons that we need to repeal as many of these laws as we can, especially because we are currently backing up every law with potentially lethal force.
But so that was basically just a joke. You
It was
didn't really-
I mean, it was an attempt at a joke.
bad
It wasn't
or
funny. It was like a
just-
non-funny joke. It was just a stupid statement.
Okay. But now, what's your opinion on revolution? Like I was talking about, like would just hypothetically, had you been in this country back in the 1700s, would you have supported the American? I mean, would you have been an American revolutionary?
So the question comes down to the same principle, which is what is the minimum level of force to get somebody to stop doing what they're doing? With something like during the American Revolution, they tried words. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, what do they first say? They say we have made multiple entreaties, they've fallen on deaf ears, we've asked and we've asked and we've asked and we've asked, and they've just been ignored or brushed off or whatever. So now we're doing revolution. But notice that revolution wasn't the first step. Revolution was like the 500th step. So now the question comes, what is the minimum amount of force to get this government to stop taxing us? I don't personally believe that it's lethal force. And I know that many people believe that in order to get this government to stop, we have to kill them all. I don't actually think that's true. I think we can do this without lethal force. In fact, I believe we can do this without any force. And that's why I continue to support a non-violent revolution at this time. Now, if at some point in the future there's some definitive proof that words and policies and activism will never work, that's a different question.
So like gun confiscation.
Like with gun confiscation, the question is, what is the minimum level of force required to stop that? Now, theoretically, it could be lethal force, but I want to say try everything else that you can possibly think of. Don't please, I mean, listen, I hate the government as much as the next person, but don't make violence your first step. People say that violence is the last argument of kings, and I say it's the first argument of idiots. And I get sometimes what the government does is barbaric, but even then, let me tell you this. Martin Luther King helped make such huge changes without any force. Gandhi made such huge changes without any force. Thoreau made such huge changes without using force. It was effective. There are ways that we just need to sometimes use intelligence rather than violence. And so at this point, I continue to believe that non-violent revolution is the right answer.
Now, we're here at a Libertarian Party convention. Obviously, we're engaging in the electoral process, trying to get Libertarians elected, and also for Libertarians like yourself running for Senate to influence public policy, get the Libertarian message out, help keep the party on the ballot, and things of that nature. And as we know, the political system is really slanted against minor party and independent candidates and in favor of the establishment Democrats and Republicans. So do you think that there's, I'm a big proponent of Libertarians using the political process and getting elected where we can and getting the message out where we can, but I also think we should, Libertarian candidates such as yourself should be putting out messages like jury nullification, homeschooling, which I know you talk about, and cryptocurrency. Those are three of the best. And actually promoting gun ownership, and not just talking to people who already own guns, but talking to people who don't own guns, convincing them as to why it's important to own one and why the right to keep and bear arms is important. Because the more people who own guns, the harder it is for the government to confiscate them. So do you think these are all things that Libertarians can do outside of electoral politics that can move the country towards more freedom? Like I said, with cryptocurrency. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that, on those issues? Of going outside of electoral politics.
Absolutely, and that's one of the main things that I've said is we need to work to change culture. When you come to cryptocurrency, think about this. We had 4 million votes for Gary Johnson. And people are like, well, 4 million votes isn't a lot of votes. Well, that's more than we've had in the past. But you know what it is a lot? It's a huge amount for a crypto network. It is a huge addition. If Gary Johnson had spent all that time that he wasted, in my opinion.
Me too.
Talking about the fair tax, and spent all that time talking about Bitcoin or Dash or just whatever he wanted to, the result would have been an increase in usage, maybe a small one, but an increase in usage in cryptocurrency. If instead of talking about the fair tax, he talked about homeschooling, the result might have been that some of those 4 million people started considering homeschooling, and we could have helped them on that process.
Or jury nullification.
And that was the next one I was going to do.
Okay.
If Gary Johnson had spent some of that time talking about jury nullification, reminding people, listen, you don't need to be in the majority in a jury to say, no, that guy's not guilty, because that's not a crime. You cannot be guilty of a thing that isn't a crime. He could have spent that time doing that. But again, he didn't. He was too focused on these other things. He was too unfocused on the actual cultural changes that will actually spell difference in America. The single largest breakaway success in terms of opting out of government, in terms of downsizing government, has been the homeschooling movement. And that is not changing, it's not by changing a bunch of laws, it's by changing what people do. As we change what people do, guess what else changes? Culture. When you become more self-reliant in education, you become less afraid. You could become less in need to have the state protecting you from your imaginary enemies. And that key change is so important. So I absolutely do believe we need to support cryptocurrency using our reach. We need to support a jury nullification, again, using our reach, reminding people to do this. We need to support gun usage, gun rights, gun ownership. Not even changing the laws, but within the law, buy yourself a gun. We need to work on these voluntary cultural changes because that's where success is going to be guaranteed to happen.
Yeah, now I got involved in the Libertarian Party back in 1996 at a young age. I was flipping through the channels. I saw Harry Brown on C-SPAN. And do you remember Harry Brown?
I wasn't around during that time, but I've read his book since, I've watched his videos. I consider him to be one of the most inspiring libertarians in the history of our party.
Yeah. I would say Harry Brown and Ron Paul are my two favorite presidential candidates ever, kind of a tie between those two. But anyway, Harry Brown had a very strong libertarian message, and he was the Libertarian Party's presidential candidate in 96 and 2000. Then we had Michael Badnarik in 2004, who also had a strong message, and I liked him too. He's probably my next in line for favorite candidate. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I believe that since then, now what year did you come into the LP?
I started getting involved in 2010.
Okay. Well, I really feel like since 2008, our presidential tickets have really gone downhill. In fact, to be honest with you, I voted enthusiastically for Harry Brown in 96 and 2000 and enthusiastically for Michael Badnarik in 2004. I haven't voted for the Libertarian presidential ticket since then, and I'm a member of the party. In 2008, I cast a write-in vote for Ron Paul in the general election. In 2012, I wrote in none of the above for president. And in 2016, I thought about doing none of the above again. I also thought about writing in Darryl Perry, but I decided to vote for, I was registered to vote in Pennsylvania, which was one of the states where Darrell Castle, who was the Constitution Party's candidate for president, made the ballot. And I think that Darrell Castle and his VP, Scott Bradley, were more libertarian than Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, who I don't consider to be legitimate libertarians. I have continued as a member of the party, and I have continued voting for libertarian candidates running for lower level offices. But I've been really upset with our presidential tickets, and what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like these tickets are not really very libertarian, if they've been libertarian at all.
One of the questions that was asked during the chair's debate last night, I was not in that debate, I was in the vice chair's debate, but during the chair's debate, somebody asked, are you worried about a takeover? And I was sitting in the audience and I just snickered at that because I said, well, if we're going to take over ourselves, what's the need for a hostile takeover? If we're going to keep nominating Republican-like candidates, why does the Republican Party need to take us over? We're taking over ourselves by nominating people who are then predictably bringing in the type of people that don't understand libertarianism, don't appreciate our actual positions, don't agree with our actual positions, and often don't know our actual positions because our presidential candidates are too busy not telling them about our actual positions. So I do believe that while I respect Gary Johnson as a person, I did not support him in the primary. I voted him from the general election. I will not be supporting Governor Weld unless he very, very significantly changes his messaging strategy. Bob Barr already showed his true colors when he broke ranks in order to endorse Mitt Romney, the most just statist Republican. I mean, even Republicans didn't even think that guy was Republican.
Wayne Allyn Root did that while he was sitting on the LNC.
Wayne Allyn Root
he started campaigning for him. He started campaigning for him, and that's what led to him leaving the party.
Yeah, he you know, Wayne Allyn Root and I were on the LNC at the same time, and I was constantly fighting with him about that thing, and eventually he publicly endorsed Romney and then left. Those are the types of, that's what's been happening. If we want to make that stop happening, we need to say which presidential candidate is going to recruit, is going to bring in the type of people that will help us build a house of brick, not a house of straw. Which candidates are going to bring in the strong libertarians? Because I'm telling you, they're out there. They're just going in stupid places. They're joining the alt-right. They're joining all these racist type organizations.
Well, they're not voting. A lot of them are not voting
voting.
Anarchists. Some of them are going to Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, some of them are just not voting at all.
Yeah.
So many anarcho-capitalists, they voted for Trump. Why is that happening? Because we are not putting forward the candidates that are actually going to attract our actual current allies and potential allies. You know, I got a lot of heat for going on Chris Cantwell's show. And
I was going to talk about that in a few minutes, but anyway.
I got a lot of heat for that, and I said, listen, I get that you don't agree with white supremacy. White supremacy. As you can see from my face, I don't really agree with it either. I'm not going to be like the world's first, Indian American white supremacist. That doesn't make any sense. I went on that show for one simple reason, because I wanted to convert the people who I believe had been led astray. I believe that many of the people in the darker parts of the alt-right have been led astray. They are people who should be with us, who are confused, who are angry, who felt that the whole world is turning on them, and they're going in this insane, not very useful direction. And I believe we need to bring them back. It's the same way that I view the military. The military is people who are doing something that's very damaging. Realistically, they're doing more damage than the alt-right ever has. And we need to bring them back. Mm-hmm. We don't need to pander to them. And I didn't go on that show to pander to people on the alt-right. I went to that show to talk about ending the welfare state and the things that actually matter to actual libertarians. I told them the idea of this tribalism doesn't even make any sense, because a lot of the things that happen to people of one race are done to them by the same race.
People in their own race oppressing them.
Yeah, by people in their own race oppressing them. And so, I mean, and I didn't want to focus the whole interview about racism, which I thought would have been a waste of time. But the reason that I was there is to try to convert those people back. It's the same reason I talk to the military. It's the same reason I talk to government school teachers. It's the same reason I go to PTA meetings. I know that those are people who are lost. I want to bring them home. I want to bring them back. I want to bring them to the idea of freedom, because that is a universal human idea. It's not just for 1% of the population to believe. It's something we all should believe.
Wait, I think you made a comment online. This was another one of the controversial comments. Something that you'd rather have a white supremacist who wants to end the welfare state than, was it a government school teacher who wants to keep it, or something along that?
I think it was just anybody who wants to keep it.
Yeah. Now, sometimes the term supremacist gets misused, mm-hmm. because supremacist is somebody who wants to rule over somebody else. Mm-hmm. So sometimes some of these people are actually nationalist or separatist or something, mm-hmm. and sometimes some of them might be supremacist. Some of them are supremacist as well. Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying that not all of, like when they were talking about the Unite the Right thing, mm-hmm. in Charlottesville, mm-hmm. that was a coalition of people. Some of the people in the coalition were Nazis. Some of them were supremacists, but not everybody there was. Mm-hmm. Some of them were just, people who were maybe just wanted to keep the statues up, Mm-hmm. But anyway.
The problem, though, is the Nazis were there recruiting.
Yeah.
And we weren't, because we were afraid of the optics. Listen, this is not a job for being afraid of optics. Mm-hmm. This is our job as libertarians is to say, over there, the message of liberty is being misused. Mm-hmm. And people are going from, libertarianism to the alt-right. That's the wrong direction. I want people to go who started out, I spoke to somebody today. Yesterday. He showed me, and this is somebody who ended up supporting me in my vice chair today. He showed me on his arm a swastika tattoo that had been removed. You could see like the faded.
Is that person here today?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, still here. He showed me the faded tattoo. He showed the removed tattoo. Mm-hmm. He says, "This is where I was, mm-hmm. and this is where I am. Mm-hmm. Now I'm a pure libertarian." And he showed me that he had been led astray in that way. I strongly believe that people have been led astray to a bad ideology. The correct thing to do is expose them to a good ideology. Mm-hmm. And that's the key thing we need to be doing. We need to be unafraid to reach out to literally anyone.
Well, we've had a lot of fighting in the Libertarian Party that I think has to do with cultural preferences. And I really hate the whole left-right thing myself. Mm-hmm. I kind of think like libertarians should focus on the non-aggression principle and property rights and try to keep their cultural preferences out of it as much as possible. Now, I've been called every name in the book in the years that I've been involved in politics. I mean, you name it, I've been called it. It wasn't that long ago that I had people accusing me of being a leftist or whatever. I was a socialist or something, communist or Democrat or whatever, liberal. And lately I've had more people accusing me of being a right-wing extremist, conservative, racist, xenophobe, whatever. And there's kind of a divide in libertarianism between right libertarians and left libertarians. Sure. And I think part of that issue has come over and the other thing I wanted to mention about Charlottesville is, some people in the Libertarian Party freaked out about the whole Unite the Right thing. Now, I don't agree with everybody who was involved in Unite the Right. Like I said, I know that there were a few people there that were Nazis. There's a guy named Matthew Heimbach, and I've listened to some interviews with him online, and I have some strong disagreements with that guy. But anyway, although I'm going to tell you where I stand on the I support keeping the statues up. I'm a history buff, and I don't like, and it's become, if we lived in a private property society, then the parks would all be privately owned, and you could put up whatever statue you wanted. That's the purest position, but that's not the society we live in. We don't have privatized parks, and it's become a tradition in our society for people to put, historic statues and markers and things like that up. And I felt like it's selective outrage. Like, I'm really outraged about this statue from the Confederate States of America or from the Founding Fathers, but I'm not outraged about this Vladimir Lenin statue, who was not even an American citizen, that's in Seattle, Washington, in a park, or one in New York City. Or I'm not outraged about Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer. Now, I like Muhammad Ali, but he actually did make some racist and homophobic comments.
Sure.
So should we go to Louisville, Kentucky and change the name of the street and tear his statue down and tear everything? So I don't like this whole tearing down thing. And honestly, unite the right, regardless of what you think of them, whether they were right, wrong, indifferent, good people, bad people, they had a right to free speech. It was a legally permitted event. They had a right to be there. And I think Antifa was actually the aggressors in that situation. And I know that there were some people marching with Confederate flags, and there were one or two people that had Nazi flags, and people freaked out over that. Well, there were Antifa people there with communists, the hammer and sickle. So do you think that some people, like the coverage from some people in the libertarian movement and party on that issue, on that controversy, was kind of biased? Like, that Antifa showed up and they were the aggressors. They attacked them. Those guys, they were there to, like, they had two other Unite the Right rallies in Charlottesville. There were no problems because Antifa didn't show up. Antifa showed up and was the aggressors, and the cops didn't really do their job. They basically, the job of the cops, standard police procedure, if you have groups that are in opposition in a controversial issue like that, is to keep the groups separated. The police didn't do that. They basically marched the Unite the Right people right into the Antifa people. So anyway, do you think that there was, by some segments in the Libertarian Party, did not really have fair coverage of that event and what happened that day?
Selective outrage has become the modus operandi of the Libertarian Party. And whatever people say about government school teachers, about the military, that they think they're doing the right thing, applies to Antifa, it applies to Unite the Right, it applies to both. And when I see, this, like, people complaining about, like, leaving up or tearing down, like, these not very expensive statues, but at the same time are not willing to speak out against the very expensive government schools, to me, that is a misordering of any kind of reasonable libertarianism. In terms of statues specifically, I think that would have been a great opportunity for us to be focusing on why we should privatize all parks. If you want to have a private park and put 50 statues of anyone you want, go ahead and do that. By the way, I do not support neighborhood ordinances that say you can't have 50 statues in your house. If it's your property, put 100 statues. That's your right. Similar, if you want to make a park or buy a park or whatever and get rid of every statue, go ahead. And I do believe that one of the things the government should be doing is selling off as much public land, as much government-owned land as possible, using it to cut the income tax, to pay down Social Security, to do whatever we need to do to reduce the size and scope of government. And so I think that would have actually been a great time to talk about that.
Now, you took heat from people in the Libertarian Party for comments you posted on the Libertarian Party Facebook page, and on the Facebook page, other libertarians have the opportunity to rebut you.
It's not usually. I don't think I've taken any heat from anything I've posted on the Libertarian Party Facebook page. It's been my personal Facebook page.
Okay. I stand corrected. But anyway, other libertarians can go online and rebut you. And in fact, did you allow them, or did they come onto your Facebook page? And
yeah.
Okay, so you were basically, it was just kind of like a public debate between libertarians.
Yeah.
And people were acting all outraged over things you said. Now, here's actually getting into a kind of a party function issue. And, I've done a lot of ballot access petitioning over the years, and I don't know if you're aware that I don't know if you've heard this from me or not, but I've made issue of the fact that most of the people that a Libertarian Party hires to go out and collect signatures are not even libertarians. And I can tell you that some of these people misrepresent the party to the public, either because they're just they'll say anything to get people to sign so they can get paid more money, or in some cases just out of ignorance.
Sure.
You know, they don't know what a libertarian is. I can tell you they've hired people who thought we're calling the Libertarian Party the Liberal Party. You know, and they've had people petitioning for the LP who've said that it's a petition to increase the minimum wage or just anything. Now, I'm not saying everybody's doing that, but some of these people are. It's gone on. And so here was something I thought was really hypocritical from some LNC members. Okay, you're a longtime libertarian activist. I don't think anybody can accuse you of not being a libertarian, and you're making some radical statements, which, you know, lots of libertarians have made lots of radical statements over the years. Okay, well, the very same people didn't really seem to care. Like they're on the national committee voting to allocate money towards ballot access, and they don't even know who the petitioners that they're sending money to are, or how they're pitching the petition to the public. They have no idea who's collecting signatures in Ohio, you know? And so do you agree with me that, should we have a national office staff that consists of just random people hired off the streets, you know, who were Democrats or Republicans or apolitical mercenaries working at the national office? I mean, I wouldn't want that. I presume that everybody who works at the national office is actually a libertarian. Is that correct?
That to do what you're describing at the national office would be illegal. You're not allowed to have a political test for who you're hiring.
Oh, so I thought they did. I thought as far as I know, everybody who works at the national office is a libertarian.
As far as I know, they are, but it's not because it's a requirement. It's because no one who's not a libertarian would work that hard for that little money. There's just no way that would ever happen. No Democrat or Republican would ever consider doing it. It's the same way that, you know, if you're running a church bake sale, anyone can participate in that church bake sale, but if you're going to work that hard for no money, you're probably going to be one of the faithful, like realistically speaking.
Well, here's my, I went through the Libertarian Party's FEC reports a few years ago, and I looked at all the ballot access expenditures, and I came up with a rough estimate that 76% of the money that the LNC spent on ballot access went to pay signature gatherers who were not libertarians. So, what I've said is, and I've seen very little effort from people in the party to get more libertarian activists out on the street doing this job. Because when you're out there, have you ever done any petitioning?
I've done a very, very small amount.
Okay, well, when you're out there, you talk to lots and lots of people. And a lot of people come up to you and have questions about the party, about candidates, different issues, things of that nature. Now, I would much rather have somebody standing there that can actually accurately answer those questions, can hand out a pamphlet or a flyer that I know is not going to lie to people, that's going to make an attempt to get a valid signature. Because on average, actual libertarians have gotten higher validity rates on petitions than when they have these mercenaries doing it. And in fact, there's actually been cases where these mercenaries have actually ripped off the party, basically defrauded the party out of money, caused ballot drives to fail, caused drives to almost fail where the LNC had to do, or somebody else had to do an expensive last-minute save. So to me, it's like, I find it very frustrating that I've seen very little to no effort from the Libertarian Party to get more libertarian activists out doing this work. I mean, we can find libertarians who will jump on an airplane and fly off to a convention, but no efforts put into getting libertarians to go out in the street and talk to the public. Because when you're out talking to the public, the Libertarian Party doesn't get a lot of television coverage. Libertarian Party does not get a lot of radio coverage. Libertarian Party doesn't get a lot of newspaper or widely read magazine coverage. So that leaves two ways left that we have to reach people. One is the internet, and the other one is what I would call boots on the ground activism, where you just go out and talk to people. There really aren't that many libertarians doing boots on the ground activism. There's a few libertarians who will go out and collect a few volunteer signatures here and there, or they'll go out to their county fair or a gun show and have a table. But in terms of having boots on the ground activists, there isn't that much of it going on. So to me, it seems like the party is shooting itself in the foot and basically killing its ground game by having, let's say 75 or 80% of ballot access funds going to people who aren't even libertarians. So what are your thoughts on that?
In an ideal world, I would agree. And I think there should be given every kind of encouragement, preference, whatever it is, to get actual libertarians who are willing to actually engage and spread the message as possible. Historically, from my understanding, and again, it's not my area of expertise, but historically my understanding has been that there's been some times where we have not been able to get that. I don't think it's actually true, though, to say that there hasn't been an effort to get volunteer signatures or to get volunteers involved. I think there's nothing but efforts to do that. It's just sometimes a hard thing to get people to do.
Well, I don't mean just volunteers. I mean a libertarian, like hiring libertarians. Say, hey, you're a libertarian.
And there's quite a bit of push to make that happen.
I don't think there's been enough. And let me give you an example here. When Ron Paul was running, I worked on the Ron Paul campaign in 2008 and in 2012. And I don't know if a lot of people know this or not, but there are some states where even Democrats and Republicans have to collect signatures. And some of those requirements are deceptively difficult. Well, I can tell you both in 2008 and in 2012, almost the vast majority, like 95% of the petitioning for Ron Paul was done by actual libertarians, either paid or volunteer. Most of the paid petitioners who worked on the Ron Paul campaign were actually libertarians. And so how come Ron Paul could do it, but the Libertarian Party couldn't? I think it's because Ron Paul and the people working on the Ron Paul's campaign actually wanted to have libertarian, activist type people out working. And it seems like some of the people in the Libertarian Party just don't care. That's the vibe I've got.
In my time in the LNC, I've pushed for it. I've encouraged it. Every time it's come up, I've voted in favor of it. But again, I don't work directly on ballot access, so I don't have a huge amount of direct influence. But in terms of, is the idea good? Yeah, of course it's a good idea. Obviously, we
get
want
more activists on the street.
Yeah, obviously we want our activists doing this. Well, I do think we need to push this idea a little bit more because I feel like some people feel weird about taking money from the Libertarian Party. Listen. Please take money from the Libertarian Party to collect signatures and talk about the Libertarian Party. You are helping because when you do it better than the other people that we're going to have to pay. So that is my direct pitch to anyone who's watching this. If you are thinking about, instead of, doing something else, if you're like, looking for a way to make some money.
Even part-time.
Really consider this, and it's you should not feel guilty. You should feel proud to be helping the Libertarian Party.
It's a great way to spread the message to the public, and you can make some money at the same time.
Exactly.
But I thought it was hypocritical that people on the LNC were attacking you for making radical but still libertarian comments. And like I said, I agreed with some of your comments. Some of them I didn't agree with the school board thing. I understand you were joking about that, but that was one of the ones I didn't agree with. But anyway, they were attacking you, who I don't think, like I said, anybody can accuse you of not being a libertarian, but yet they have petitioners on the street that they're paying money to that could be out misrepresenting the Libertarian Party to 1,000 people a day. And, yeah, you're right. Unfortunately,
the biggest issue is the candidates.
Yeah.
I ran a radio show, which I still do, and I used to have 4 candidates on it every week. And my plan was that if I could go through a full radio show without any candidate proposing an increase to government, if I could just get at least one cut and no increases, then I would put it on the Libertarian Party national Facebook page. And I almost never did. I couldn't get through 4 candidates, and the way I would phrase the questions would be things like, what part of government do you want to cut? It wasn't like open-ended the way we're doing right now. It'd be like, what part of government do you want to cut? And the usual answers would often begin with, well, it's not so much I want to cut, but I want to add this thing. And that's libertarian candidates. We have a lot of work to do. And right now, it's why it's vital that we make sure that our leaders are bold and clear and comprehensible about what libertarianism is.
Now, getting close to wrapping up here, but there was another topic I wanted to discuss that you kind of brushed on briefly, and you were talking about the alt-right and stuff like that. Now, I mentioned the divide on libertarians, and there's kind of a left versus right, which
sure.
I've always called myself a libertarian, not somebody who's on the right or left. I don't like the whole right versus left thing, but I think one of the there's controversial topics that even libertarians don't agree on, and one of them is immigration. And now I come down on the side of, if we lived in an anarcho-capitalist society, all property would be privately held, and there'd be no taxes and no coercive, no elections, democratic elections, unless they were held by voluntary associations where the outcomes of the election only applied to the people who voluntarily consented to it.
Much like our organization.
Yeah, like the Libertarian Party, yes. But there'd be no coercive elections or with coercive outcomes. And there would also be no government welfare programs and no forced association. And then you could kind of have your quote-unquote open borders. See, I think the whole open borders thing and closed borders, they're both kind of misnomers. The real issue is who controls the land, the government or private property owners. And so my take, and I know there's going to be there's some libertarians who disagree with me on this, but there's others who do agree with me, is that while government exists, that there should be an immigration policy in place that does not invite people to the country who are hostile to the culture and that are going to come in and get on welfare or.
I don't think getting on welfare would be hostile to the current American culture.
Well,
I think
it's adding to the destruction of
I think it is the current American culture.
Yeah.
We live in a welfare state where even middle class people are encouraged and expected to take welfare, who are frowned upon. Many people, I saw this episode of House of Cards where the candidates were beating each other up for using private schools because they didn't play along with the welfare state. So I don't think that using welfare is opposing American culture. I just think it is American.
Well, unfortunately, it's kind of devolving in that direction. But it wasn't the original. But anyway, I mean, at one time in this country's history, you came to America and you had to work. And there was no welfare state back in those days. So I think it's kind of intellectually dishonest of people to compare immigration in the 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s to, modern times, because we didn't have a welfare state back in those days. And in fact, back in those days, those, years gone by, I've read articles that said like a third of immigrants actually left. But another issue gets into cultural displacement, and this gets into a very controversial topic. It gets into ethnicity and racism and things of that nature. Now, I understand you're of Indian ancestry.
True.
And were you born in this country, or were your parents? Okay, so you're a natural born American citizen. Your parents immigrated here, and everything.